We don't serve your kind here." The words sliced through the perfumed air of Elysium Boutique like a shard of ice. 23-year-old Ethan Parker stood frozen, his hand still outstretched toward the leather jacket he'd spent 6 months saving for. Around him, the hushed conversations of Manhattan's elite shoppers fell silent. Designer heels stopped clicking against marble floors. In the gleaming mirror beside him, Ethan caught his reflection. Faded jeans, clean but worn sneakers, simple white t-shirt, standing in stark contrast to the luxury surrounding him. The boutique glittered under crystal chandeliers, its walls lined with clothing that cost more than Ethan's semester tuition. He'd researched for weeks, saved every dollar from his barista job and graphic design gigs, even skipped meals. This limited edition designer jacket wasn't just clothing to him. It was his first professional investment, something to wear to design interviews that said he understood aesthetics. The sales associate, Julian, in his immaculate suit with a diamond tie pin, stepped closer. His smile remained perfectly intact, but his eyes had turned to flint. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere, more accessible," Julian suggested, his manicured hand now blocking Ethan's path to the jacket. A few wealthy customers chuckled. One woman whispered something behind her hand, eyes gleaming with amusement at Ethan's expense. None of them noticed the man in the corner, sunglasses pushed up on his head, beard neatly trimmed, who had set down the silk tie he'd been examining. Robert Downey Jr. S' expression darkened as he watched the scene unfold, already moving toward the growing confrontation. Ethan's chest tightened, his ears burning hot with humiliation. The $2,800 in his wallet, every cent he'd saved while eating ramen for dinner 3 months straight, suddenly felt like monopoly money in this temple of wealth. 6 months of overtime shifts, of saying no to friends, of walking instead of taking the subway, all for this moment, all for nothing. "I have the money," Ethan said, voice steadier than he felt. "I've been saving for this specific jacket." Julian's eyebrows arched with theatrical surprise. Having money and belonging are different things entirely. The boutique had transformed into an arena, with Ethan at its center. The other customers, finance executives, old money heirs, celebrities hidden behind designer sunglasses, watched with varying degrees of interest. Some openly stared, entertainment found in this unexpected social collision. Others pretended not to notice while absorbing every detail. In the harsh boutique lighting, Ethan's simple clothes betrayed him as an outsider. The jacket, black leather with subtle red stitching, expertly cut to enhance any silhouette, hung on display like a museum piece. It was part of designer Alessandra Vega's limited Metamorphosis collection, praised by fashion critics for its ability to bridge classic rebellion with contemporary elegance. "Listen," Julian continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried through the boutique. "This is the Metamorphosis collection. It's about transformation, evolution." His eyes flicked dismissively over Ethan's outfit. "You can't transform what isn't ready for change." A woman in a cream cashmere sweater that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent laughed softly. "Julian always knows best," she murmured to her companion. Julian straightened his already perfect tie. "Besides, we only have one left in that size. We're holding it for clients who understand its significance." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Its significance is why I'm here." Alessandra Vega's work combines sustainable materials with avant-garde design principles. The red stitching represents— "Please," Julian interrupted with a patronizing smile. "Anyone can read a press release." Phones had appeared in several customers' hands, not to call for help, but to record this collision of worlds, social media fodder, entertainment at Ethan's expense. Robert Downey Jr. moved closer, weaving between clothing racks. He'd come to Elysium seeking privacy, wearing simple dark jeans and a vintage band t-shirt under an unassuming gray blazer, dressed down enough that even Julian had initially offered only a perfunctory greeting, saving his excessive charm for more obviously wealthy clients. "Maybe we should call security," suggested another sales associate, a young woman whose eyes betrayed discomfort with the situation despite her professional veneer. "That won't be necessary," Julian replied. "I'm sure our guest was just leaving." He emphasized guest with such practiced condescension that it transformed into an insult. Ethan stood his ground, though his voice had quieted. "I just want to try on the jacket. I've been following Vega's work since her graduate collection at Central St. Martin's." Something shifted in Julian's expression, a momentary surprise at Ethan's knowledge, quickly masked by renewed disdain. Enthusiasm doesn't equate to appreciation. Some things aren't meant for everyone. A few more customers had gathered, drawn by the spectacle. One young man in a bespoke suit actually took out his wallet, as if preparing to place a bet on the outcome. The entire store had become a theater, with Ethan cast in the role of naive outsider about to be taught a lesson in social hierarchy. Robert Downey Jr. had now positioned himself just a few feet away, his presence still unnoticed by the enthralled audience. His eyes that had portrayed Tony Stark's journey from arrogance to humility, took in every detail: the jacket, Julian's smug expression, the cruel amusement of the onlookers, and most of all, the quiet dignity in Ethan's stance despite his obvious embarrassment. Julian placed a manicured hand on Ethan's shoulder, applying just enough pressure to suggest movement toward the exit. "Let me be perfectly clear. This jacket, this entire collection, is about status. It's about earning your place in certain circles." His voice took on a pedagogical tone, as if explaining simple arithmetic to a child. "You wear Vega to signal that you belong, and you, quite clearly, do not." Ethan's fingers curled into fists at his sides, his knuckles white with restraint. 6 months of anticipation crumbled around him, replaced by the bitter taste of public rejection. The customers' stares burned into his back, their whispers creating a soundtrack to his humiliation. "That's not what Vega's work represents," Ethan countered, his voice quiet but firm. "Her designs are about breaking boundaries between high fashion and street style. The Metamorphosis collection specifically challenges the idea that luxury only belongs to certain people." Julian's laugh was musical and cruel. "Is that what you read in some fashion blog? How charmingly naive." He gestured toward the other customers. "These people don't just wear the clothes, they live the lifestyle. They attend the same galas as Vega, vacation at the same resorts. They understand the context." A well-dressed couple nearby nodded in agreement. The woman adjusted her diamond bracelet with practiced casualness. "It's about respect for the designer's vision," she added, though no one had asked for her opinion. Another customer, a gray-haired man in a suit that probably cost as much as Ethan's semester tuition, shook his head. "Young people today think everything should be accessible. That's not how the world works." Each word was another brick in the wall being built between Ethan and his dream. The jacket hung just feet away, close enough to touch, but separated by an invisible barrier much stronger than security glass. The unwritten rules of social class that no amount of saved dollars could overcome. "Perhaps," Julian suggested with manufactured kindness, "you could try the outlet mall in Jersey. They sometimes get last season's rejects." He smiled as if he'd offered genuine assistance rather than another deliberate humiliation. A flush crept up Ethan's neck. His hand reached reflexively for the phone in his pocket, the impulse to document this treatment, to expose it online, but hesitated. What would that accomplish except to brand him as someone who couldn't handle rejection? The wealthy patrons around him would simply see it as confirmation that people like him didn't belong in spaces like this. "Is there a manager I could speak to?" Ethan asked, struggling to maintain composure. Julian's smile widened. "I am the floor manager, actually, promoted last month." A woman with a designer handbag dangling from her wrist murmured to her friend, "This is why they should have a dress code for these places." Her friend nodded sagely, as if this wisdom deserved preservation for future generations. Robert Downey Jr. had now positioned himself directly behind Julian, examining a display of silk scarves with casual interest. His eyes, however, remained locked on the unfolding scene. Those familiar with his journey from Hollywood outcast to one of its most respected figures might have recognized something in his expression, the look of a man who remembered what it felt like to be judged, dismissed, and underestimated. Julian continued his performance, clearly enjoying his role as gatekeeper. The Metamorphosis collection isn't just clothing. It's a statement about evolution, about becoming something greater. His gaze swept over Ethan again. Some caterpillars simply aren't destined to become butterflies. The boutique had grown quieter now, the background music suddenly more prominent in the silence. Customers had stopped pretending to shop, openly watching the drama unfold. Some had phones raised, capturing the moment for social media entertainment. Ethan took a deep breath, gathering the fragments of his dignity. "I've studied Vega's design philosophy since her debut. This jacket represents her belief that fashion should be transformative, regardless of who wears it. That's why I've saved for it, because I understand exactly what it represents." Julian's expression hardened, the facade of helpfulness evaporating. Understanding and belonging are different things. This boutique has standards to maintain. Standards? The voice came from behind Julian, carrying the unmistakable cadence of a man who had delivered some of cinema's most memorable lines. What exactly are those standards? Julian turned, the practiced retail smile snapping back into place, before recognition dawned. His eyes widened, professional composure momentarily fracturing. "Mr. Downey? I didn't see you there. How can I help you today?" Julian's voice had transformed completely. Gone was the condescension, replaced by eager deference. Robert Downey Jr. stepped forward, positioning himself beside Ethan rather than opposite him. The boutique fell into stunned silence. Phones raised higher, this unexpected plot twist too valuable not to capture. "I'm curious," Downey said, his tone conversational, but with an edge that anyone familiar with his Tony Stark portrayal would recognize, "about these standards you mentioned." He gestured toward Ethan. "This young man seems to know more about Vega's design philosophy than you do. He's saved for months to purchase her work because he values it. Yet you're refusing to sell to him because... what? His jeans aren't expensive enough?" Julian's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. The other sales associates had frozen in place. The customers, who had been so comfortable in their superiority moments before, now seemed uncertain whether they should be watching or pretending not to notice. "I'm just following store policy," Julian finally managed. "We cater to a certain clientele." "Ah," Downey interrupted, removing his sunglasses completely. "So the policy is discrimination based on appearance? Fascinating. Please, tell me more about how that aligns with Vega's vision of transformation and inclusivity." The boutique air seemed to crystallize, time suspended in the wake of Robert Downey Jr.'s question. Julian's face performed an impressive journey from shock to recognition to calculated recalibration. His eyes darted around the store, seeking support, but finding only the silent stares of customers, suddenly uncertain which side of history they wanted to occupy. "Mr. Downey," Julian began, his voice honeyed with newfound respect, "you misunderstand. We simply want to ensure that our merchandise finds the right homes, people who will appreciate—" "I appreciate authenticity," Downey interrupted, his voice carrying easily through the hushed space. And what I'm seeing is someone who genuinely values design being denied service because he doesn't fit your visual expectations. He turned slightly to Ethan. How long did you say you've been saving for this jacket? 6 months, Ethan answered, still processing that Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man himself, had just stepped into this fight. I work as a barista and freelance graphic designer. I've followed Vega since her graduate collection showcased sustainable materials with avant-garde techniques. Downey nodded thoughtfully before turning back to Julian. 6 months of saving. Impressive commitment to something he values, wouldn't you say? The woman with the diamond bracelet who had sided with Julian earlier shifted uncomfortably. Her companion studiously examined his watch. The phones recording the scene hadn't lowered. If anything, they'd multiplied. But the atmosphere had transformed from entertainment at Ethan's expense to something more complex. Julian straightened his posture, attempting to regain control. Mr. Downey, of course we value all potential customers, but surely you understand that exclusive boutiques like Elitism have certain aesthetic standards to maintain. Our regular clients expect a particular shopping environment. Aesthetic standards, Downey repeated, the words deliberate and measured. He glanced around the boutique, taking in the customers who now seemed less comfortable in their expensive outfits. Let's talk about aesthetics then. Downey ran a hand along the sleeve of the coveted jacket, examining the craftsmanship with genuine appreciation. Alessandra Vega started designing clothes in her grandmother's garage in Queens using thrifted fabrics and repurposed materials. Her first runway show featured models she found on subway platforms and in community colleges. His fingers traced the red stitching that made the jacket distinctive. She built her brand on the belief that transformation comes from the intersection of contrasts, luxury and accessibility, tradition and innovation. He turned to Ethan. What was it you mentioned about the red stitching? Ethan stood straighter, his voice finding new strength. It represents the thread of rebellion running through conventional design. Vega uses this signature detail to symbolize how small disruptions can transform an entire aesthetic. Exactly, Downey agreed, addressing the entire store now. The irony here is staggering. You're selling clothes designed by someone who explicitly rejects the exclusivity you're enforcing. He gestured toward the other customers. How many of you are wearing Vega's designs right now? Clothes created to challenge exactly this kind of gatekeeping. Several customers glanced down at their attire, the discomfort in the room palpable. A man in a Vega blazer actually took a step back, as if trying to remove himself from the scene. Julian's professional mask was slipping, revealing flickers of panic beneath. The young female sales associate who had suggested calling security earlier now stood with her arms crossed, her expression suggesting she was reconsidering her employment choices. This isn't about aesthetics, Downey continued, his tone conversational yet pointed. It's about arbitrary barriers designed to make some people feel special by making others feel less than. I've spent enough time in Hollywood to recognize that game. The question is, he looked directly at Julian now, why would you choose to play it when you're selling designs created specifically to dismantle it? Julian's mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. Mr. Downey, I assure you, we have the utmost respect for Ms. Vega's vision, but we also have responsibilities to our establishment, our clientele. Your clientele, Downey interrupted, gesturing broadly to include everyone in the boutique, seems pretty uncomfortable right now. Maybe they're realizing there's something profoundly unattractive about watching someone be humiliated for having the audacity to appreciate good design while wearing affordable clothes. A ripple moved through the watching crowd. Someone near the back actually applauded briefly before stopping, embarrassed by their own enthusiasm. Downey turned to face Ethan directly. What's your name? Ethan Parker. What do you do, Ethan Parker, besides save for months to buy jackets you appreciate? I'm studying graphic design. I work on brand identity projects, trying to help small businesses tell authentic stories through visual communication. Downey nodded thoughtfully. So you understand the power of visual identity, how what we wear communicates who we are or aspire to be. That's exactly why I wanted this specific jacket, Ethan confirmed. Not as a status symbol, but because it represents the kind of designer I hope to be someday. Someone who bridges worlds instead of enforcing boundaries between them. The boutique had fallen completely silent. Even Julian seemed transfixed by the exchange. The watching customers had transformed from spectators to witnesses, the distinction subtle but profound. Downey reached for the jacket and lifted it carefully from its display. He held it toward Ethan. "Try it on." Julian stepped forward automatically. "Sir, I'm not sure if—" "I'm sure," Downey said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I'm very sure that we're all about to see what happens when someone wears a design for exactly the right reasons." With a weightless grace that belied its significance, the jacket slipped onto Ethan's shoulders. The leather embraced him like a second skin, the cut transforming his posture, the red stitching catching light and attention in equal measure. The boutique fell silent, collective breath held as if witnessing an unveiling. "Perfect fit," Downey observed, stepping back to assess the transformation, exactly as Vega intended. It was impossible to deny. The jacket didn't look out of place on Ethan, quite the opposite. Against his simple white t-shirt and worn jeans, the design's brilliance shone even brighter, unencumbered by competing luxury labels or status symbols. What had seemed like a fortress of exclusivity moments before now felt like a stage, with Ethan as its reluctant star. Julian's professional composure had cracked completely. His eyes darted between Ethan, Downey, and the watching customers, calculating damage control. The woman with the diamond bracelet, who had been so judgmental earlier, now studied Ethan with reluctant admiration. "You know," she said to her companion, loud enough for others to hear, "it actually looks better with simple basics. Lets the craftsmanship speak for itself." Her companion nodded sagely, as if this had been his opinion all along. That's the true test of good design. Ethan examined his reflection in the boutique's mirror, a smile of quiet vindication replacing his earlier humiliation. The jacket didn't just fit his body, it fit his vision of himself, the designer he was working to become. Downey turned to Julian, whose expression now oscillated between professional panic and personal revelation. "I believe Mr. Parker was trying to make a purchase before we got sidetracked by aesthetics." Julian cleared his throat, straightening into customer service mode. "Of course, sir. Right away." He gestured toward the register, his movements stiff with damage control. As Ethan reached for his wallet, the carefully counted savings finally fulfilling their purpose, Downey placed a hand on his arm. "Allow me," he said. Ethan shook his head. "I appreciate it, Mr. Downey, but I saved for this. I want to pay for it myself." Downey's eyes crinkled at the corners, his smile genuine. "That's exactly the right answer." He stepped back, respectful of Ethan's choice. Throughout the boutique, phones that had been recording the confrontation were now capturing this moment of resolution. Social media captions were already being crafted, but not the ones Julian had feared. Instead of mockery aimed at Ethan, the narrative had shifted. Number respect, not rejection, began trending within minutes, alongside number Downey defends design and number true style has no price. As Ethan completed his purchase, Julian now performing customer service with mechanical precision, Downey engaged him in conversation about his design studies. Other customers lingered, their shopping forgotten, witnessing the transformation not just of a young man in a jacket, but of an entire social dynamic. "You know," Downey said as they walked toward the exit, "Alessandra Vega is a friend. She's launching a mentorship program for emerging designers next month. Someone who understands her vision as clearly as you do should apply. He handed Ethan a card. My assistant's contact information. Send your portfolio. Outside the boutique, sunlight replaced crystal chandelier illumination. Ethan stood straighter in his new jacket. 6 months of saving transformed into something more valuable than fashion. Dignity reclaimed. Passion validated. Thank you, he said simply, not just for this, but for seeing me. Downey nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. Style isn't what you wear, it's why you wear it. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. As they parted ways, Ethan toward the subway, Downey toward a waiting car, the story was already spreading beyond the boutique's glass walls. What had begun as an attempted humiliation had transformed, like Vega's designs themselves, into something unexpected and profound, a reminder that true style isn't measured by price tags or exclusivity, but by the authenticity of self-expression and the courage to claim one's place in any room.